ladies and gentlemen, I'm Krishna C. Nadella, and this is State of Mind. We're back here in front of the McMaster University Student Center here at McMaster University, where we have the privilege to speak with Dean of Students and Associate VP of Students and Learning, Sean Van Koughnett. Sean's going to share with us his state of mind on the topic of mental wellness, a topic that's near and dear to my own heart and to his as well. Join us. Sean, thanks for joining us back again on State of Mind.
It's a pleasure.
Now, we had talked in the previous episode very briefly about mental wellness and how important it is, especially as incoming students are back on campus. But we never really kind of went to the nitty-gritty, and I wanted to just take a second to make sure our audience can understand, what does mental wellness, mental health mean to you?
It's really, we look at wellness here holistically, and the physical, mental, and emotional components of a student's health are important for their success. So when it comes to mental wellness, we look at it from the standpoint of everything that we do here. How does it impact their mental health? And what can we do to support mental health? And trying to distinguish between, with students, a healthy level of stress and distress. And that's a concept that we try to convey to students as well, that just because you're feeling a little bit of stress does not mean that there is a mental health issue here. So that's an important point to try to get across. Stress is a natural part of being a student and being alive. Right. So trying to educate and to try to get students to see how they're able to get through aspects of stress, and then also understanding when they need to reach out for help.
Now, we've seen a rise in awareness in the last 15, 20 years, a rise in leveraging resources from students, from the community, whether it be academic or professional. Is mental wellness more emblematic of this current generation, or is it just we're better at identifying it now?
I think we're more aware, as you point out, we're better at identifying it. I think there are also, we've been better in the K-12 system at supporting students who may have begun to experience mental health issues. And because that support's there in the K-12 environment, I think that there are students now here, and in Ontario, we've increased the number of university spaces across the system. So what you're seeing are students who may never have made it to university in the past, who are now here, and we are in a position where we need to support them. So I think there's a combination of factors. There are arguably increased pressures as well than there might have been 20 years ago, financial and career-oriented pressures being a couple, where it can exacerbate some of these stresses that students perceive and that they need to seek help for.
Now, to your point, the university environment is a hotbed of stress, anxiety, tremendous number of factors are pulling students at the same time. What type of resources should a good university have in place to ensure that students are set up well, not just for the first day, first month, but for the 4 years to 10 years that they're on campus?
So in terms of our support services, we have a student wellness center here that has counselors, psychologists, psychiatrists, mental health nurses. Our challenge is to meet the demand, the increasing demand. Every time we are able to add staff, it seems like the demand has increased. So I think but that's an essential service that, in my view, should be viewed as a temporary support. Hopefully we're either supporting students to the point where they have overcome, or at least their level of mental health challenge is diminished, or if they're really experiencing acute mental health crisis, we're able to effectively refer them into the community. The other service that's essential to support students with mental health challenges is our accessibility services. So how we accommodate them in the classroom so that they can achieve what they want to academically is vitally important. And so that's another area that's experiencing increased demand. And it's another area that's heavily labor and time intensive. So keeping up with demand is another challenge with those services, but that's important. The third thing is, across the campus, if you're in contact with students, do you have an understanding of what a mental health challenge might look like, and do you understand what to do when you see that? So that doesn't mean that we're trying to train a couple thousand frontline workers to be counselors, but what it does mean is that there's a recognition that it's everyone's responsibility to help students who may be experiencing mental health difficulties.
So let's take that to the student level. Is there not just an awareness of the leveraging resources and mental stress, mental anxiety, What is it to a student to be able to help their fellow student, to help them cope? Because that's where they're usually going to go first.
Right, and so I spoke of frontline workers, but their peers are, as you pointed out, they may be the front, right, before the front line. And so we work with our McMaster Students Union and they have a peer support line. We have worked to educate them on some of the same types of issues as our frontline staff, which is, what are you looking for? What do you do when you see a sign or symptom that there's a mental health difficulty? How do you refer them? Try to make it as simple as possible. But the more people we can mobilize and equip to deal with those who might have a mental health challenge, the better. But you're exactly right. Students are the front line in this.
Now, mental wellness isn't something that's very near dear to both of us. I'm married to a psychiatrist, so I say this not with any sort of disrespect, but let's talk about anxiety. At the risk of sounding insensitive, is anxiety just not an inability to cope? And is today's generation just not able to handle the stresses that maybe previous generations were willing to take on and suck it up, so to speak?
Yeah, I'd probably say, obviously, no and no to your questions. That there's often a physiological basis to these types of conditions that need treatment. I'd say that this type of anxiety in particular, it's always been there. And I think some research will show that there's an increased prevalence because people are more comfortable coming forward and talking about it. They are more comfortable. They've been accustomed to coming forward and seeking help for it. So I would push back on that comment. I know you weren't saying it.
Yeah, of course not.
You don't actually believe that yourself, but for certain, it is something that needs to be treated. It's something that it is legitimate and needs to be taken seriously.
So, and along the same lines of what you talked about, having that front line, where does faculty and administration? Now, many of them come from universities renowned for research, for publications. They come into a university setting looking to continue and further their career, but they are also educators.
Yeah.
What type of conversation do you have to ensure that they understand they have a responsibility in this too? And do they recognize that?
Yeah, and it varies. If you have a few thousand faculty members, you're going to get some who completely understand from day one what their responsibility is. And there are others who maybe don't, but get there and are willing to learn. There are some who it's more difficult to reach. So it really varies across the spectrum. I think the challenge for administrators is, especially in the undergraduate, first and second year courses, how do you get the instructors in place that do have that understanding and are better equipped to deal with these issues? But it is definitely a difficult thing. We go into new faculty orientation and talk about the Student Wellness Center, the services that are offered, what to look for. We talk about academic accommodations. So, but it is, with a few thousand faculty members, it's a challenge to get all of them on board.
So in the same vein, I remember my first and second year at McMaster, you're in one of a class of 300 people. Do we have to, from time to time, review the model with which we teach students here at the university level? Because it may not be for everyone.
Well, that's a really difficult challenge. Our economic model forces larger classes. Our preferred educational model would be more individualized treatment. So how you navigate that tension is a central question for our entire higher education system. The economic model versus the pedagogical one. But certainly more if we were able to lean more towards our preferred pedagogical model, it would, I think, enhance our ability to deal with some of these mental health issues, and in some cases they would not necessarily arise as much. So, for instance, if we, and this might change, this might take 20 years to change, but some people have asked, why do we test the way we do?
Right.
Why do we stick hundreds of students in a gym and have them write final exams? What if there were no final exams?
Right.
So you think about just that one example of how do we change the way we think about how we teach and assess. That can have dramatic impacts on student mental health and the services or the support that we're required to give in support of that system.
So, going into the school year, we have a lot of students who will be watching the show, not just here in Hamilton, but in New York on our television station. you were someone they would look to as a source of strength, source of wisdom. How do you have mental balance? How do you manage all the things going on in your professional and personal life?
You're assuming right now I have balance. No, I do try. Actually, I make sure that I carve out a few hours at least each week to do some physical activity. And no matter how busy I am, and some weeks it doesn't work. So I think you have to look at kind of a month and say, if you go for too long without working that, at least if I do, I start to become less productive. So I will block off parts of my calendar, whether it's at night, in the morning, sometimes middle of the day, to do physical activity. As well, I carve out time, so from supper time to my kids' bedtime, I'll, as much as possible, attempt not to do any work unless I'm at an event, a work event. So it's a matter of intentionally carving out that time. Because if you don't carve out the time to work in that balance, it'll get eaten up very easily by work. So it's really just being very intentional about how I manage my time. And for me, it's physical activity and family. That's what I do outside of work.
Last question. In our previous episode, we asked you to give some advice to current students and incoming students as they enter the academic arena. I'd like to take that to the next level. What advice would you give to students who are maybe in their third or fourth year, about to graduate, maybe enter the real world? And if university is a precursor to the real world, how do they make that parallel transition successfully?
Yeah, well, I've spoken to a couple students who were thinking about that next step just recently, and from my own personal experience, when I left university, I took a job that wasn't the ideal. I got my foot in the door, and it was at a job I didn't really like. It was enough to pay the bills, and I tend to give that same advice to students who aren't sure. It's not necessarily settling. It's maybe settling in the short term to not wait for that perfect thing, because it might never come along, but to try different things and give it a period of time where you're in a job that might not pay what you wanted it to, might not be quite as filling as you wanted it to be, but it could, as long as you're willing to learn and continue to put yourself out there, eventually you'll get to where you want to be. So it's that attitude of trying things without waiting for that perfect opportunity to come by.
Well, we're really appreciative that you tried to go on State of Mind and spend some time with us. So thank you, Sean, for the time, and appreciate talking about a topic that's near and dear to both of us.
Thanks very much.
That'll wrap up our show for today. If you like what you saw in today's episode, please feel free to like, share, comment, and subscribe on the various social media platforms at the bottom of your screen. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us today. And remember, every life is a book. Make yours a bestseller. Have a good night.